What's up, friends? My name is Ralph Amsden, and this is the ASU Forecast, a podcast on the 1012 Podcast Network. A new era in the Big 12, a new podcast for a new era. We're going to get into this Wyoming win, 48-7. I flew out for it. We'll get into the good, bad, and ugly of my trip. We will talk about what it was like to tailgate with the Valley Athletic Booster Club, and get into the results of the game. Obviously, Arizona State held Wyoming to under 100 yards of offense, but should there be any concerns? We'll also talk about Kenny Dillingham attempting to recruit for Arizona State basketball. That's right, basketball. I also got to meet athletic director Graham Rossini. Got a cool story from sports information director Doug Tamaro about Graham Rossini's first game ball that I'll share with you. We're also going to get into this Mississippi State preview. Obviously, Arizona State has never beaten an SEC team. I think that's common knowledge. Their best chance to do it is Saturday against former Arizona State baseball and football commit Blake Shapen. We'll get into his Arizona State recruitment, how he ended up at Baylor instead of ASU, and we'll talk about what Mississippi State looked like against Eastern Kentucky. Talk a little bit about what we have in common as teams. And late in the show, we'll get into my prediction for this game. Obviously, we got the all gold uniforms. We're going to talk about that. Arizona State's serving an alligator po' boy at the game as one of their specialty foods this week. And then our Todd of the Week segment. We'll talk about somebody who went above and beyond for the program. And finally, we'll finish up with Sun Devil signs, some suggestions for some signs to bring to the game against Mississippi State at Mountain America Stadium. And we will finish up finally with my prediction for the outcome. Let's get into it. The 1012 Network is brought to you by Charlie Hustle, vintage inspired clothing. They got some Arizona State stuff up there. They got t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies. Make sure you give it a look. I think you can get a 15% discount for your first time there. One of the things I really like, Arizona State logo hoodie in all gold. Might not get it shipped out in time for this week's game, but when it comes time to wear gold and when the weather cools off a little bit, if you are wearing a hoodie at Mountain America Stadium on September 7th, you're a psychopath. But for the future, assuming Arizona State is going to play deep into the season, you're going to need a hoodie. Check out charliehustle.com. Big thanks to them for being a sponsor of the 1012 Podcast Network. Okay, so let's get into this Wyoming recap. First of all, it was so fun to be in the stands. I have not been in the stands for an Arizona State game, I believe, maybe since the 2013-2014 season. My first time covering Arizona State in any professional capacity was actually a road game at Colorado in 2014, where Taylor Kelly busted his foot. Mike Bercovici had to come in. There became a little bit of a quarterback controversy toward the end of that year. But before that, for years and years and years, I had season tickets. And, eventually the place where I had season tickets, that section of Mountain America Stadium, Sun Devil Stadium, whatever you want to call it, does not exist anymore. And so had to give those up. Was very, very lucky to end up in a position where I got to cover the team professionally for years, 4 years for Devil's Digest, afterward for Pac-12 Apostles as part of the Unafraid show. I'm an Arizona State alumni. I love this school. I tried to put my fandom aside to do the most professional job possible as managing editor and lead recruiting reporter. However, still an ASU fan, can't hide that. I did have a lot of people this week walking up to me and saying, I'm sorry. And what they were saying I'm sorry in reference to was Arizona State beating the living daylights out of Wyoming, because of people who know me know that I am from Wyoming. I lived in Laramie. My mom went to University of Wyoming. I had uncles go to University of Wyoming. I've had a bunch of friends go to University of Wyoming. I have followed University of Wyoming since 1996, the same year that I started following Arizona State. But I am not a Wyoming alum. I've never chosen to live in Laramie as an adult. Other places in Wyoming, sure, but 7,200 feet elevation, going upstairs, not fun there. So, I'm from northern Wyoming. That's when I lived there in college. Lived there for 3 years. I love Wyoming. I love the program, but on Saturday, it was all about the Arizona State Sun Devils. I do have to admit something, though. When it was 41-0, there was part of me that was like, okay, that's probably enough. I did start to feel bad for the boys from Laramie. I'm not gonna lie. I thought this was gonna be a low scoring affair. I told people to bet the house on the under. And what's insane is the under would have hit if Wyoming did not call 2 timeouts in the last 30 seconds and score with just 4 seconds remaining in the game to make it 48-7. So if you lost money on this, don't blame me. Blame Jay Sawvell. The under was about to hit. It was. I did say to take Arizona State in the spread, so hopefully it ended up a wash. Hopefully you didn't parlay it, and you left having not lost any money. I lost a little bit of money on my trip out to Tempe, and I didn't realize it until this morning when I got an email asking me how my stay was at the Tempe Hyatt. Well, I didn't stay at the Tempe Hyatt. 6 weeks ago, I booked a hotel room at the Tempe Hyatt, and I forgot I even had a hotel room. So won't be able to fill that survey out. That's a little bit of an L on my part. Stayed with my good friend Chili instead. And he was like, hey, man, anything I can do to save you money? And I was like, oh, that's really, really cool of you. Turns out I had already spent $150 for a hotel room. Did not stay there. So, yeah, oops. But the trip out was nice. I did fly Frontier. Probably not going to do that again for a while. But, you know, I got there on Saturday, went right to the stadium, ended up at the Valley Athletic Booster Club tailgate. I was walking around the parking lot, and Navi Brazon's dad came and he got me, and he pulled me into the tailgate. I had a couple of friends with me. They ended up having the absolute time of their lives. I'm not sure they'd ever been to a tailgate before. It was just so much fun to hang out with Sun Devil fans. Saw a lot of the people right afterward from the Crafty Devils tailgate, who I all consider friends. Some of the most awesome people that follow Arizona State are part of that Crafty Devils group. It was amazing to see my guy William, Res Devil, Peter Boyle. Man, it was just so much fun running into so many friends, and then media friends. Obviously, you know, I covered Arizona State. Most of the people that I hang out with when I was outside the home in Arizona, when I lived there from, 2012 covering high school football until 2021 when I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. Anytime I'm leaving the house, I'm hanging out with somebody who's covering a football game alongside me. So it was so awesome to hang out with Brad Denny, to see my guy Cody Cameron. I mean, it was just it was awesome. But sitting in the stands, definitely a new experience. Haven't sat in the stands since the renovation. Was there with friends, kind of in a pretty Wyoming heavy section. Wyoming fans not really having a good time. Once you're down 17-0 pretty early, there's nothing left to do but drink. So there was some tense, terse interactions. But for the most part, everybody was good to each other. I was really proud of the way that Sun Devil fans conducted themselves. One thing I do want to get into, though, I ended up on the South Concourse. And I've had so many people tweet me and be like, why did you go over there? Okay, so the student section looked huge. Come to find out, second biggest student section ever. And second to 2014 game against UCLA. If I remember correctly, that might be the UCLA game where they vandalized the field, like put UCLA in the fork, and then dropped like 40 in the second half. Chandler High product, Brett Hundley at quarterback. So the last time the student section was even close to 14,000 was 10 years ago. This was a near record set, almost 14,000 students. It looked huge. So I just early in the first quarter, I wanted to get a look at what that environment was like. I walk over there and I get stuck on the South Concourse for 10 minutes, not moving at all, with a bunch of old ladies and little kids and people just crushed up next to each other, students trying to make their way through. It was so many people. Better than not having fans in the stands, but that might be one thing that the Sun Devil event staff want to try to clean up, because that was a little dangerous there in the first quarter. That's where I was for the from right after the interception return for a touchdown until after the second field goal was kicked. So a good 10 minutes just stuck in one place. There's some videos of that out on Twitter. It just massive amount of people. I also had a friend fly out to go to the game whose parents had given up their season tickets. I mean, when I say parents had given up their season tickets, the last time ASU and Wyoming played was 1977. They had season tickets back then. And so they, after, all this time, had given up their tickets, and they couldn't stay away. So they came to the game. They had their kid fly out who lived 2,000 miles away. My dad was at the game. I didn't even know it, with a former Arizona State Sun Devil who played defensive line under Frank Kush. There were people at the game that I didn't even realize were at the game. That place was packed out. It was so much fun. I hope it looks like that for Mississippi State. And the best part about this result, and we'll get into the nitty gritty here in a second, the absolute best part of this result was the fact that you probably had 5,000 to 6,000 fans that were in that stadium for the first time. I know a couple of the people that I had brought with me to the game, this was their first experience of Sun Devil football, and they had fun. This was something that we've talked about on Sun Devil Spaces every Wednesday on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. It hasn't been fun lately. And in order to get fans in there and keep that energy up, it has to be a good time. 48-7 is about as good of a time as you can have. A defensive touchdown on the second play of the game, that's about as good of a time that you can have. I mean, you had a scoop and score. You had a pick six. You had several sacks. You had some awesome, catch and runs. The game throughout was just an absolute blast. And that's 5,000 or 6,000 people whose imprint of Arizona State sports is going to be that they had fun in a win. Those people come back. They're a lot more likely to come back having sat out there in 106 degrees when the whole thing was a party. It's the reason people go to the Waste Management Open every single year. You have 150,000 people there over the course of the weekend. They don't care that it gets hot. They care that they can have fun with their friends, and this was a lot of fun. So kudos to Arizona State for putting on a show for all of those people. Most people I know who are my age, it was the 19-0 game against Nebraska that really cemented them into Arizona State fanhood. Memories like that matter. They really, really do. And also, I was getting text messages from friends who haven't really talked much about Arizona State football in the last 5 or 6 years. They decided to get together with friends, watch the game on the couch, and they're excited. They're hyped. They're going to be watching the game for the second year in a row. They're going to have to tell their spouses and kids, like, hey, I know that you feel like I had Saturdays to give you for the last few years, but the Sun Devils might be good again. So I'm absolutely loving everything that this is doing for Arizona State and the energy surrounding the program. Let's get into the actual results of the game. Now, Wyoming looked slow. They looked a little faster on TV than they did in person, but they looked slow. Getting down 10-0 early, that's not really how they work. They try to keep the game close, stay on you, wear you down with that running game. We didn't even give them a choice. Deep third quarter, their quarterback, who, out of respect for the fact that I covered him in high school, we'll mention his name, Evan Svoboda. Good kid. I think he'll get it right as the season goes on. But I think he was like 4 of 9 for 32 yards, deep in the third quarter. That's not going to get it done. Arizona State was all over him, blew him up every single chance they got, bottled up the running game outside of a couple of counters, held the team to under 100 yards offense for an entire game, which is insane. Remember, this Wyoming team, with Evan Svoboda starting, took last year's Texas team in Austin into the fourth quarter, tied at 10. So I don't know. I was just super impressed by Arizona State. The linebacking core seemed to be incredible in pass coverage. They seemed to really communicate with each other. The transfers that we got in from San Diego State, New Mexico State, they are leaders on this defense. I loved Keith Abney in coverage. Our defensive line put in some work. I feel like they're probably the most underrated, under-talked about story from this last game because of how good of a game our linebacking core had. The running backs looked fantastic. I mean, the fact that your fourth string running back is having as much success as he is, Kyson Brown, shout out to you, the 67-yard catch and run from Sam Levitt. That was super, super impressive. And he's supposed to be behind DeCarlos Brooks and Raleek Brown and Cam Scattaboo. And we talked about the fact that this was, this was their deepest position group by far. They looked like it. They really looked like it. It was an absolute blast to see DeCarlos Brooks out there healthy. His touchdown was great. The second quarter that he had late in the second quarter, a couple of big runs were absolutely fantastic. I know a lot of people were worried about Cam Scattaboo losing this weight. It didn't seem to matter. He never went down on first contact. He he does look a little bit physically more like Demario Richard, who wasn't a skinny running back. This weight that Cam Scatterbu lost, it's not like it turned him into a daisy or something. He was bowling people over. He looked the exact same. He still does that thing where he shakes his helmet and looks like he gets a concussion after every single play. Don't love that. But, for the most part, he looked exactly like the Cam Scatterbu of old. And to me, he had the play of the game. If you remember, with about 11 minutes left in the third quarter, Sam Levitt hit Shimon Matire, the tight end, in the flat. He turned upfield. He had nothing but grass in front of him for about 25 yards. When he first caught that ball, Cam Scatterbu had a Wyoming defensive back locked up on the goal line, blocking 25 yards out in front. And you think to yourself, oh, that's a long time to hold a block. This kid's going to get off, and it's probably going to be a play at the goal line. But by the time Matire got down to the end zone and scored, Cam Scatterbu had blocked his man about 8 yards deep into the end zone. That type of effort, incredible. And just the energy from everybody throughout the entire game was so fun. I think people are going to remember that Zyrus Fiasau interception return for a touchdown on the second play for a really long time. Could be the thing that sets the tone for a bowl season. We will find out. I have to say that the game was a great time. Not a lot of criticism from my end. The experience was incredible. I hope it was mirrored for a lot of other people as well. The band was rocking. The student section was great. It was really cool to see Kenny Dillingham lobby to get even more students to break the record for this Mississippi State game. I hope that happens. And it might, considering that the Wyoming game was over Labor Day weekend. That tends to depress turnout when students have the ability to go spend 3 days on the lake or something like that. Most students, if they're smart, don't have class on Friday. Then all of a sudden you got yourself a 4-day weekend, but you still have 14,000 students that want to spend that at Mountain America Stadium. That's incredible. And so I tend to believe that it is very possible that they break this record this week against Mississippi State. And hopefully they show up. And by they, I mean Arizona State. Because, you break a record and get a win in the process, the students are going to feel like they're part of that win, which they will be. Road environments are very effective, not just for the weather, but for the environment that you create. And you have to understand, these Mississippi State kids, they're used to one of the loudest, artificially loudest. They're cowbell people. But, they are used to one of the loudest environments in all of college football. In Stark Vegas out there in Mississippi. So you got to bring the noise if you want to compete to what they're used to, just cheering them on. And then I think the mixed with the weather and the play styles, it could end up being a good result for Arizona State. So let's get into a couple of things here. Shout out to Burrito Express, not a sponsor, but a friend. I went out and enjoyed their $4 burrito deal. Grabbed one for myself, one for my dad, my stepmom. Drop those off at their house. Make sure that you support any business that's out there supporting Arizona State, whether they're supporting the athletes through NIL deals or whether they are contributing to the program directly. Some of these sponsors, I don't know how you support them. I think Raytheon, I make sure you buy your weapons of war from Raytheon. I don't know. But as far as the small businesses go that are actually making an effort to put some change in these players' pockets and get some value back, make sure you provide that value back, because you will be encouraging these businesses to continue to engage with the Arizona State University athletes. And don't just keep it to football. Any NIL deal that I find out about, I'll let you know. I'm sure Speak of the Devils is talking about the same. I'm sure the guys at PHNX, they do a little bit of the same. Obviously, some people have sponsors that conflict with, if they're building a show like this or trying to provide entertainment, they might not be able to come out and tell you about every single business out there. On my end, I don't really care. I'll let you know whoever's doing whatever, and anything we can do to support the people who are supporting Arizona State. Let's do that. Let's encourage, not just the NIL environment where you're writing big checks to a collective, and the collective turns around and compensates the athlete to maybe do one or two things here and there. Let's talk about the actual holistic relationships between student athletes and business owners that will continue long past their time as Sun Devils. So shout out to Burrito Express. Made sure to go out and support them. And it was my first time out there, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you to Cam Scatterbu for saving me like I don't know, like $12 on 3 burritos. That was awesome. So a couple other things about this game that we should probably talk about. Kenny Dillingham. Kenny Dillingham decided to go to bat for Bobby Hurley. And this is what happens when you have an alumni as coach. Kenny Dillingham puts Koa Peat, reserve offensive lineman, in the game at running back. Why does that matter? Koa Peat is like child 7 of 8 of the Peat family. He is a walk-on lineman at Arizona State. Every single member of this family has played college sports, from Andrus, the oldest, who is currently an Oakland Raider after spending the last 9 years on the New Orleans Saints. I believe their father also played for the Raiders, so that's got to be kind of a cool moment for that family. But I covered Todd Peat in high school football. I covered Cassius Peat, who won 4 titles as a basketball player at Corona del Sol and went to Michigan State to play football. Arizona State fans were very pissed off when he decided to go to Michigan State over Arizona State. And then, you know, the girls in their family, like Leilani, you know, they got a bunch of really good basketball players that I was able to cover as well. The youngest, Koa Peat, is a 5-star basketball player with 3 championships to his name already at Perry High School, under the same coach that Cassius played at Corona del Sol, Sammy Duane. And he is probably going to go down in Arizona high school basketball history as the best player to ever do it. So he's out at Arizona State on an official visit. It's cool enough that Arizona State is getting an official visit from Koa Peat, because you got to understand, every program in the country wants him. Duke's got money for him. Arizona has money for him. We're competing against the Blue Bloods for this kid. You know, I think he would like to stay close to home. Kenny Dillingham hits him up before the game. From what I was told the kid that you be the best athlete to ever come here, football or basketball. And I would know because I'm a fan, you know, because Kenny Dillingham grew up rooting for Arizona State. So he's already, you know, chatting this kid up on the sideline, as you do anybody who comes in for an official visit. You know, they're out there, they're allowed to engage with everyone. And then in the game, in the blowout, puts his older brother in at running back. And that is one of the funnier. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that. Just very cool. And I hope that Koa and the Peat family enjoyed what was an incredibly unique gesture, a cross sport gesture, from Kenny Dillingham. I will say that when I posted about it after the game, Todd Peat quote tweeted it and said, "I never thought I'd say this, but go Devils." So not a bad sign for Arizona State when it comes to being in the running for Koa Peat. And one of the funnier features of this game that also included maybe the greatest yo-yo, I guess what yo-yoist, is that the right thing? Yo-yoer, yo-yoologist. I don't know. There was a kid at the game who was just putting on an incredible display through the entire fourth quarter of yo-yo trickery, ended up on the big screen, ended up going viral on social media, ended up doing, I think, 2 spots with like 10 and 12 news in the Valley, and then got in touch with, Doug Tamaro at Arizona State. He might be a featured part of the entertainment we see in the stands for the rest of the season. So shout out to that kid. That was incredible. And then one of the last things to happen after the game was hanging out as the media members were filing back into the stadium to do their stand-up reports afterward, saying hi to a bunch of old friends. Doug Tamaro walks out and he tells me a story that he was looking for a game ball for Graham Rossini, the athletic director. This is his first game as athletic director over the football program. Arizona State gets a win. He wanted to get him a game ball, couldn't find one. Turns out Kenny Dillingham had already hunted one down and made sure to take care of the whole thing. So Kenny Dillingham's peripheral awareness, elite in this game. I'm not just sucking up to him because he's somebody that, you know, we've called for to be the head coach for years, or the fact that he used to come into Sun Devil spaces and just listen when he was at Florida State and when he was at Oregon. I root for the guy, I really do, but I objectively, his awareness of the little things, I think, is really going to bring in a new era of Sun Devil football, because the previous regime, you know, say what you want about them, I do think that they overperformed expectations as far as Herm Edwards goes. However, awareness of the things going on around them was just at an all-time low. It was like Mr. Magoo levels. Story time. I was there when Herm Edwards committed his first NCAA violation. I was standing right next to him. There was a kicker for Centennial High School. He wasn't a kicker, but there was a field goal contest at the high school state championships. Herm was there at Sun Devil Stadium, as it was called at the time. And this kid who is probably 6 foot, 320 pounds, freshman, kicks a field goal and wins. I don't know if it was like Canes for a year or something like that. And Herm Edwards was like, I want a picture with that kid. He initiated it. Herm did. Well, it turns out the kid was a football player, which technically you're not supposed to be an athlete when you're in those contests. That's how these companies ensure that they're not giving away too much free stuff. They usually screen. But the kid was an offensive lineman at Centennial. He ended up finishing his career at Saguaro. That's neither here nor there. But Herm Edwards was like, I would like a picture with that kid. And guess what? I took the picture. and I realized it kind of right afterward. Other people were taking pictures as well, but I realized it right afterward. I'm like, oh, this man just committed his first NCAA violation. And he never really tried to learn any of the rules. And he just made mistake after mistake after mistake because he thought he could personality his way through everything. Kenny Dillingham got a big personality too, but the peripheral stuff matters quite a bit. Spatial awareness, situational recognition, all of those things matter a lot. And Kenny Dillingham, I feel like in this Wyoming game, displayed a great deal by getting Graham Rossini that game ball, by putting Koa Peat in the game, and then obviously the result speaks for itself, 48-7. So I did meet Graham Rossini after the game. He's tall. That's my feedback on Graham Rossini. He's doing a fantastic job as Arizona State's athletic director, but he's very tall. So let's move into Mississippi State. Let's get into a preview of Arizona State's probably best shot to beat an SEC team ever. This is one of those statistics that, like, is it really a statistic? How often does Arizona State play against the SEC? Not much, right? I was at the game where Matt Stafford came to town with Noshawn Moreno and AJ Green. That might be the best college football team I have ever seen in person, just as far as the way they look. These SEC boys, they're big, they're fast, and that can be a little bit intimidating. So, but it is one of those statistics that, like, is this really a statistic? So, such as up to this point, obviously they play on Saturday, but Michigan has never beaten Texas, right? Well, some context there. They've never once met in the regular season. They only met in one bowl, and Vince Young had to, like, put up 17 in the fourth to get Texas that win. So, one of the greatest college football players of all time was playing for Texas at the time, went on that next year to win a national championship and beat USC. But that's the context of that statistic. Here's another one. Boise State is 3-0 against Oregon. Oregon has never beaten Boise State. They play on Saturday. That's probably going to flip. So it's a statistic, but there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's one of those things. It's not really a representation of, like, Arizona State's always outplaying SEC teams and losing. They just really haven't had an opportunity. This is probably their best opportunity. I watched Mississippi State's game against Eastern Kentucky. You might look at the results, say 56-7. Arizona State could be in trouble. 35 points in the first half for Mississippi State. Here's what I'll tell you. Mississippi State, under Jeff Lebby, they play so fast. Too fast. It's not necessarily a good thing. It's one thing to run tempo. Todd Graham did this. Left lane, hammer down, line up, snap the ball, have 3 or 4 plays that you're going with. Taylor Kelly was great at that. Mike Bercovici was great at that, right? Tempo slowed down a little bit with Manny Wilkins, but they still ran that offense pretty fast. If you remember when Mike Norvell was the offensive coordinator of Arizona State, that whole first drive, that DeMario Richard would get like 18 carries a game and 7 would come on the first drive because they just move. Well, Mississippi State's a little bit like that. Here's the difference. This Mississippi State team is a lot of the players are left over from the previous season. They were not good. Zach Arnett was the head coach because Mike Leach tragically passed away. And Zach Arnett was the head coach. Zach Arnett moved away from the air raid for some reason, which became a big dispute between him and last year's quarterback Will Rogers, who was moved on to University of Washington, was that he had promised that they would continue to run the air raid. They were built for that air raid. Zach Arnett's a defensive coordinator. He didn't believe in the air raid anyway. They go a completely different direction. And what ends up happening with Mississippi State last year, in their last 6 SEC games, they averaged less than 10 points a game. This team is a lot like last year's team personnel-wise. Now, there have been some additions, obviously. Kevin Coleman, probably the best player on the entire offense. He came over from Louisville. He's very good. As a punt returner, he's probably top 3 in the entire country. If we kick to him, we are idiots. That is Kevin Coleman. Remember that name. Hopefully you don't hear it too many times on Saturday night. Blake Shapen. And we'll get into the Blake Shapen thing here in a minute. He transferred over from Baylor. He has not had a ton. He's played a lot, but he's not had a ton of success at quarterback. And we'll get into that, I said, in a minute, in our little Blake Shapen segment. So I know that maybe some people want to call him a traitor or whatever. His transfer had nothing to do with him being a traitor. He didn't even transfer. He never ended up at Arizona State in the first place, but we'll talk about that. But I will say this about this Mississippi State offense. They play fast. Their first 18 snaps, I charted this, their first 18 snaps came in 5 minutes and 50 seconds of action. Their first 18 snaps. That's like 12, 15 seconds per play run. Now, what did they look like over those 18 plays? Well, they scored on the third play of the game. They also had a turnover on downs. They punted and they scored a second time. So they had 2 drives that went well, 2 drives that didn't go well. And they also had a couple of plays called back for offensive penalties. They seemed sometimes as confused by their own pace of play as Eastern Kentucky did. Now, it did not look like high IQ football. It did not to me. Not to me. Maybe you watched the game and you felt differently. This offense, to me, looked fast. It looked like the chaos got the best of Eastern Kentucky. And don't make this mistake. Eastern Kentucky actually plays pretty well against most of their Power 5 opponents. This is the biggest blowout I've ever seen them take. So you do have to give Mississippi State some credit for that. However, they were making so many mistakes. Blake Shapen, he's a one read and run guy. If it's not there, he will take off. We experienced this. Arizona State fans experienced this with Jaden Daniels. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's not. Jaden Daniels had a tendency to take care of himself after he ran, even though he took some of the biggest hits in college football history. And there's just an incredible highlight of him getting blown up out there, especially in his time at LSU against bigger, faster, stronger athletes. But Blake Shapen, once he gets across that line of scrimmage, he doesn't really look like he knows what he's doing. And he got blown up several times. He got himself blown up trying to block for one of his running backs. He fumbled on one play. He took some serious hits. And a big part of it is once he gets past the line of scrimmage, he does not look like he has a plan. It's just get yards. You can take advantage of that. You can poke a ball away. You can lay a big hit. It's all fair game once they're past the line of scrimmage. Here's another thing. They had an uncontested fumble in the second quarter after one of the dumbest drives I've ever seen. So it was raining, so we'll give them a little bit of leeway on this. But so here's what happened. And Blake Shapen ended up leading this team in rushing, by the way. He takes off a lot. He had 7 carries for 44 yards. Probably took a big hit on about 4 of those and did fumble once. But there was a drive in the mid-second quarter that kind of epitomized what this Mississippi State offense looks like when it's not working, right? So they ran 3 plays, snapped the ball every single time with 35 seconds left on the play clock, which is insane. There's no need to go that fast. There's fast and there's too fast. They run 3 plays for 9 yards. So it's 4th and 1. Now they've already gone for it on 4th down once earlier in the game and did not get it. And amazingly, it was 4th and 3 at midfield in that situation. They snapped the ball with 25 seconds left on the play clock. Didn't even try to get the defense to jump. Didn't use a timeout. Anything. Insanity to me. They did not get that one. This time they did get it. They ran a halfback counter. And so on this halfback counter, they give the ball to Kevon Lee, right? And he gets a 16-yard run. And then he just lets the ball go. Just drops it. Just drops the football. No one even touched him. And I was like, oh, so they finally, and they did score 2 plays later because they had one wide receiver recover both offensive fumbles in the second half. So someone on their team has some awareness. But yeah, it did not look like an intelligent football team. It looked like a big, strong, fast, fun football team, but it wasn't intelligent football. And it makes me feel like Arizona State, if they're disciplined, they've got a really good chance to actually slow down an offense that put up 56 points. in week 1. And I'm sure when Mississippi State fans watch the game tape of Arizona State on offense, they've got some questions as well, because we didn't necessarily, Sam Levitt, I think he had a good game. When he got out on the run, it was very, very helpful for continuing drives. But as far as his passes beyond 10 yards, I counted one that was on target. That he completed a couple others, one where he was on the run, but Jordan Tyson had to make a couple of diving catches that you want to be on the money. Jake Smith did get the one in stride, but for the most part, everything beyond 10 yards, it was lacking in some accuracy. So it's possible Mississippi State fans watch Arizona State and they say, oh, 48-7, but is that an indicator of what their offense can actually do? I have the same questions about Mississippi State. I look at 56-7 and I'm like, but you fumbled twice. You blew two drives in the first quarter. But they did hit on some deep routes, some deep 9 routes. Jordan Mosley had a deep touchdown catch. Mario Craver had a deep touchdown catch. One of the more impressive plays of the game for Mississippi State against Eastern Kentucky is they ran a reverse for Creed Whitmore, big, fast wide receiver out of the backfield. And he ran it in for a touchdown. He looked fantastic. He's been with the team, right? So they do have talent at wide receiver, but they're not running anything too fancy. But you do have to take this offense very, very seriously. And here's why. Jeff Lebby, the head coach of Mississippi State, first-year head coach, he previously was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. He was the offensive coordinator at UCF. I think he was might have been at Mississippi. In the last 5 years, his offenses, 4 top 6 offenses yardage-wise, and the lowest was 2022, first year in Oklahoma, after Lincoln Riley took all those players away when he went to go work for Brent Venables. And that offense, 13th. So very, very dangerous offensive mind. The results are the results. You do have to take Jeff Lebby very, very seriously. But what you have to realize is he's probably dealing with the lowest level of talent that he has had in the last 6 years. And let's get into this Blake Shapen thing, because Blake Shapen, quarterback at Baylor the last couple of years, decent, not great, goes to Mississippi State where he figures, I'm going to have an opportunity to run an offense that really, really moves the ball. And, people are going to get a look at what I can do as a quarterback. Now, he was an Arizona State commit, yes, and he decommitted. And it was a class in the 2020 class in which I believe Arizona State did not bring in a quarterback. Here's the deal. The reason that Blake Shapen decommitted is because Antonio Pierce, not the head coach of Arizona State, not Herm Edwards, Antonio Pierce, a defensive staffer, convinced the head coach that staffing should fall to him. And this is a big part of Herm Edwards not learning his job. Leaders will call this delegating. The truth of the matter is Arizona State didn't have a choice. There was a skill issue at the top for Arizona State and a will issue, a willingness to learn and do what it takes to be a college football coach, to get out on the road, to recruit, to not get up at 4 a.m. just so you can lift weights, but to actually sacrifice some of your time, some of your radio hits you're doing in Kansas City and all over the country to talk NFL football, to actually focus on the program. And Herm Edwards didn't have a big network of people that he knew, but he did convince Charlie Fisher to give up his head coaching job and come be the wide receivers coach at Arizona State. He did keep Rob Likens around to run the offense after Billy Napier left. We were told Billy Napier was going to stick around after Todd Graham was fired and just work for somebody else, which again shows a massive, massive lack of understanding of how things work on Ray Anderson's part. But there was no backup plan. So you run into the situation where Herm doesn't know what he's doing through no fault of his own. He's been out of college football for 30 years, out of football altogether for 9 years. He would say, I coached in the Under Armour All-America game as credentials for why he can deal with these young athletes. I've been to those. It's like saying I coached a charity basketball game, therefore I can coach the Lakers. It never made sense. And so Antonio Pearson knew what he was doing. And I mean, you can take that positively or you can take it negatively. I think everything good and bad that happened to Arizona State in the last 5 years, everything flows from the same well here. So Antonio Pierce convinces Herm Edwards that, like, hey, we got to be able to get kids, and we probably can't get kids with all these old white dudes on the staff. So let's fire Donnie Yantis. Let's fire Charlie Fisher, who gave up his head coaching job to come coach for you and coached back-to-back first-round receivers in N'Keal Harry and Brandon Ayuk. Let's get rid of Charlie Fisher, and let's get rid of Rob Likens. And then let me go out and let me hire people I think will help us in recruiting. So they got super young. Adam Brenneman comes in. Chris Hawkins comes in. They go and get Boise State's offensive coordinator. Essentially and effectively, Antonio Pierce takes over recruiting and staffing. He is, for all intents and purposes, the head coach of Arizona State at this point in duty and function, but just not in title. So Antonio Pierce gets rid of all these guys, and then what happens next is Blake Shapen, who was committed to Rob Likens, doesn't want to be there anymore. So this happened, December 1st, 2019, I believe, these firings take place. And December 4th is when Blake Shapen decommits, and he was coming to ASU to play baseball and football. Now, would that have worked out? It rarely does. I mean, Arizona State had Ethan Long. They had a quarterback before that tried to do both. It gets tough. Would it have worked out? I'm not sure. I don't think Blake Shapen's playing baseball at Mississippi State, which has a great baseball program. I think he's just focused on quarterback now. But that's how he ended up at Baylor. He held that job down for about 2.5 years. He was okay at it. But Baylor wasn't sad to see him leave. They replaced him with DeQuan Finn. Mississippi State was more than happy to have him come in because they needed literally anybody to come in, as Will Rogers had a feud with the program and the previous head coach and had moved on to University of Washington. So all that to say, don't troll Blake Shapen. None of this was his fault. The actual story is much simpler. The coach that he committed to was fired by Arizona State's de facto shadow deep state head coach, Antonio Pierce. So shout out to Rob Likens, who is out at SMU now. And shout out to the rest of the Arizona State coaches that fell victim to that power grab, and to all the coaches that came in to work for Antonio Pierce that ended up getting screwed over because they were doing his bidding and got hit with show cause penalties. I hope everybody, except for one person in this story, is having a great day. So anyway, Mississippi State, they play fast, not necessarily smart on offense. Defensively is what I'm really worried about here. They lost 7 of their 8 leading tacklers from last season. In theory, they should be junk on defense. But I watched the way they play defense, and I wonder if it doesn't expose some of Arizona State's offensive weaknesses, or at least things that we're not sure about yet. They are physical. Their DBs are going to rough up the receivers. They're going to crash down. They're going to attack these bubble screens. They're going to try to break all that stuff up and really discourage you from doing the short stuff and trying to get yards after the catch. That seems to be Arizona State's early bread and butter. It is a feature of Marcus Arroyo's offense going back to UNLV, Wyoming, Oregon, all that stuff. So that in and of itself will be interesting. Here's another one. They really just pinched the D-line closed quite a bit. Now, could Arizona State go out there and spread them out and push them back and create holes? I hope so. But, these are some big D linemen for Mississippi State, inexperienced but big. And what I noticed against Eastern Kentucky is they closed a lot of those gaps between center and guard and tackle, which means that if you want to get some yards, you're going to have to go off tackle, which means you're going to leave your running back open to take some pretty big hits. I think Arizona State has got a couple of running backs that have shown that they can get some tough yards. It could end up working in Arizona State's favor, but the real way it seems like to move the ball against this Mississippi State defense is to attack the soft zone, to attack the middle. In order to do that, you got to be accurate. That's an unknown right now for Arizona State. Can Sam Leavitt be accurate down the field, 15 to 20 yards, or even 12 to 15? To just move the chains, get some possession type stuff. And where you can probably help is make sure that you don't end up in second, third, and long. Second, third, and long could be killer for Arizona State in this game. So we'll get into my prediction later, but I look at Arizona State's defense and I say, oh, they displayed on Saturday against Wyoming that they are very sound and disciplined and probably aren't going to get tricked by back-to-back draw plays up the middle with 35 seconds on the play clock just so you can run a 9 route on the third play and try to catch the DB sleeping because they've crept up, right? I don't think Arizona State's going to fall victim to too many of those, even though Mississippi State's like highest talent level is split out wide. Creed Whitmore, I I think that again Kevin Coleman might be the best player on the field. Jordan Mosley caught a deep ball. They are talented on the outside. Even Mario Craver had 1 catch, 54 yards, and a touchdown. So that's where a lot of their talent is. But I think Arizona State's defensive backs are disciplined. I don't think they'll give up too many explosive plays, of which, Mississippi State had, I think, 4 or 5 against Eastern Kentucky. So if you can limit that, that would be huge. So yeah, I'm looking at both defenses right now. I'm thinking maybe they match up pretty well. Maybe take the under. I know I gave you that advice last week. That was a bad beat, and I'm sorry. But if I end up being wrong all year long, you can fade me and make some money. But I do think that I do think this game might be a little bit lower scoring than you would think a team that scored 56 and a team that scored 48 going head to head. I think it's going to be tough sledding for both of these offenses. I think both of the defenses at this point are actually the strength of their team. So let's get into a couple of the peripheral things surrounding the game. I don't know if you've seen the uniforms or seen my friend Cole Streeper in his uniformity article that he put up on Devil's Digest. We're wearing gold. And here's the deal. It seems to be pretty big generational split on the people that like the gold bottoms and tops with the white helmets and the large Sparky logo on the side. There's a lot of old heads who are accusing Arizona State of stealing from the Tampa Bay creamsicle uniforms. And what I had to go back because I had forgotten that the creamsicles that Tampa Bay wore for such a long time actually had white helmets. Now, Arizona State doesn't have the helmet stripe in the same way, and it is a different color. Creamsicle and gold are 2 different colors, but the actual white helmet is kind of, I see why people say that. There's some older people that don't seem to enjoy this. This has been a smash with anybody 35 and younger. They love it. And I'm not saying everybody over 35 hates it. I think how I feel about it is really going to be dependent upon the result. But I will say that, the players having the tucked in undershirt, the white t-shirt, the jersey cutting off at the stomach, so it's white gold with the white helmet. I actually think that the video that Arizona State put out of the uniforms, they look a lot better than the actual still frame mannequin shot from the uniformity article. And I think the jerseys are sharp. I really do. And again, every single time I see that Big 12 logo, it's just shocking. But the uniform thing, it's getting a lot of praise online every single time Arizona State does these uniform reveals. I know that there's some people that are sick of it. I know there's some people that just want to see maroon and gold, but the publicity that this program gets every single time they experiment with the uniforms, I promise you it's worth it. And the recruits actually do love it. They do. To this day, Arizona State kids, when they get an Arizona State offer, are still posting pictures of the desert chrome, of the white and chrome, and the picture of N'Keal Harry in the desert ice. Like, they're still posting those old uniforms from the Todd Graham era, 2 coaching staffs ago. So the kids love the alternates, and you want to get the kids. We're going to wear maroon and gold plenty. I think that I do think that it's a good thing. But again, for me, it's if they win, I'll like them more. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, Arizona State in sections 3 and 33 serving up alligator po' boys in this game as a shout out to the Mississippi Delta. I'm curious, and tweet at me at Ralph Amsden or at ASU Forecast. What do you think of alligator? Have you had it? I've had it in Louisiana on the bayou in an old shack, dipped and smothered in Louisiana sauce. Loved it. I've had it at Bass Pro Shops where I've overpaid for alligator nuggets. Love it. I love eating alligator. But I'm really curious if any of you plan on going out and snagging one of those while you are at the game. And I definitely want to review. If you want to take a video or do a food review, I will retweet that because I love the themed food stuff. I think it's a lot of fun, and and I am curious if anybody has hit up the Pardon My Cheesesteak booths that are at Arizona State as well. I saw them while I was out there. but didn't get a chance to eat anything at the game because the tailgate fed me so well before the game. Shout out to the Valley Athletic Booster Club, of which I am now a donor. P.S. So let's get into our Todd of the Week segment. Now, the Todd of the Week, for those of you who don't know, if you didn't catch last week's episode because it didn't get uploaded correctly, Todd of the Week is, Todd Graham, when he was at Arizona State, he was doing a little too much, right? And whether that was just him as a coach trying to take over the defense every 8 seconds, trying to steal signals, had the Britney Spears mic on, had all the armbands. There was just a lot going on. But one of the things that he also did for the program is he went out and fundraised like crazy and made it possible to renovate this stadium. And he got a lot of people invested in Arizona State that had not been. And so the Todd of the Week each week is dedicated to one person who has gone above and beyond. This week, it goes out to Athletic Director Graham Rossini. I promise you I'm not trying to be a suck-up on this one. But if you saw all over social media, he sent out letters to a lot of the media members who have been covering Arizona State for the last decade. He sent one to our friend Joe Healy, co-host of the Speak of the Devils podcast. I'm going to read it to you. Dear Joe, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude for your exceptional coverage of ASU and Sun Devil athletics over the past few weeks. I look forward to continuing our collaboration as we strive to make our athletics department a source of pride and inspiration for your viewers. Thank you for making the time to meet with me to help energize the Sun Devil fan base as we approach an exciting 2024-25 year and our entry into the Big 12. Together, we can elevate the profile of the Sun Devils and foster a spirit of unity and enthusiasm among our fans and supporters. I'm excited about the journey ahead and grateful to have such a dedicated media community by our side. I understand your role and appreciate you wanting to cover us in a very busy sports market. And whatever we need to do to assist in your efforts, I am here to listen and help. This is, and now Chris Cartman posted one, Hoda Rubino posted one. A lot of media members got letters like this. I got to tell you, this is not a necessity that an athletics director goes out of their way to say, hey, I understand your role. I'm grateful to have you. Anything you need, we're going to be there to make sure that it happens. Awesome. It's just awesome. So Graham Rossini, again, not sucking up, very tall though, very tall man. You are the Todd of the Week. Congratulations. I don't have an applause sound effect, but let's move into before we get into a prediction, let's move into my favorite segment, Signs of the Week, Sun Devil Signs. Last week I suggested a few signs and the guys had me out on the Speak of the Devils podcast, and I showed some of those signs off. We're going to continue this segment. Let's get into it. Signs of the week. If you're bringing in a sign against Mississippi State where you want to take a friendly, wholesome jab, some of these might not actually be that wholesome, at their fan base, at their players. Let's talk about it. Now, I had a couple that didn't make the cut. I try to keep it to just 5. One that didn't make the cut that I am going to bring up on here, Sun Devil sign number 1, you should fear the Reaper. You should. And now it's a little bit of a deep cut for those of you that remember the Christopher Walken, Blue Oyster Cult, Will Ferrell Saturday Night Live sketch where, I need more cowbell. Mississippi State fans are very famous for bringing cowbells everywhere. They are banned from Mountain America Stadium, by the way, thank God. And don't let anybody on my son's high school team hear this because we're a cowbell community. I don't love it. My wife now owns 3 cowbells. That is 3 too many. I am not in Blue Oyster Cult. I am not writing 70s rock. So here's the deal. The cowbells are a little bit dumb. Also, we're Arizona State. We're the Sun Devils. You should fear the Reaper. I think it's a great reference. It didn't make my cut, but I want to throw it out there. You should fear the Reaper. You know what? 6 Sun Devil signs this time. 6 Sun Devil signs. Number 6, you should fear the Reaper. Number 5, Sun Devil sign. Congratulations on only having 4 players arrested this offseason. True story. True story. Mississippi State with only 4 arrests this offseason. Got to be a record. Sun Devil sign number 4. John Grisham is a Virginia fan. John Grisham is a Virginia fan. John Grisham, probably Mississippi State's most famous alumni. If you like him as an author, more power to you. I've read a few of his books. I think everybody has. Definitely, if you're a reader over the age of 60, you probably read about 30 of his books. Very prolific. he is Mississippi State's favorite son. But here's the deal. He sent his kids to University of Virginia, and he goes to all their games. What's going on here? Why is your most famous alumni a fan of an ACC school? Probably because maybe they got a better education, I'm thinking. He came up, he got that money, and he's like, should I send my kids to Mississippi State? No, thank you. We're going to Charlottesville. So John Grisham is a Virginia fan. That's Sun Devil sign number 4. Sun Devil sign number 3. Welcome to the Brandon Reese Bowl. If you remember, former Sun Devil kicker Brandon Reese, if you choose to pronounce his last name correctly, shout out to everybody who still says Brandon Ruiz for some reason. If someone tells you their name is pronounced a certain way, you should probably go with it. But he did transfer out of the program, and so a lot of people call him Brandon Ruiz out of spite. He went to Mississippi State. He did not kick as much while he was out there. I covered him in high school at Williams Field. I know his dad, Fernando, good dude. Not an insult to Brandon Reese at all, but that's who we share. That's who we have in common. He spent 2 years as Mississippi State's kicker, spent 2 years at Arizona State, scoring a bunch, like 200 points for Arizona State. I still have fond memories of him knocking off Michigan State, so no bad blood there for me. Welcome to the Brandon Reese Bowl. I think some people will get a kick out of that. Let's see. Oh, man. This one is another deep cut. Stephen D. Lee also liked the shotgun offense. Okay, so sometimes when you have to explain a sign, it's not as fun. Stephen D. Lee is the first ever president of Mississippi State University. He was a Confederate general and a virulent racist who spent the majority of his life trying to disenfranchise the black vote. Mississippi State, Mississippi, if you've seen Mississippi burn, Mississippi's got a long history, right? No one's innocent. The state of Arizona's got its own issues. State of Mississippi, long, crazy history. Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. They didn't get their first black student at Mississippi State till 1965. They didn't integrate the football team until 1969. We're talking about like my parents' lifetime. So pretty wild history there. But their first 2 presidents were Confederate soldiers. And the first one, Stephen D. Lee, was often quoted after his time as Mississippi State president as saying that the best way to maintain white supremacy was essentially shotgun voter policy. And if you know what that is, it is to physically intimidate an entire group of people to not vote. So a little bit of a history lesson in this sign. Their first 2 presidents were both Confederate soldiers. Their first one was a Confederate general who spent the majority of his life trying to keep black people from voting, and Mississippi State on the field. They run a quick shotgun offense. So a little bit of a reference to their history, a dark one if you want to bring that sign in. There's maybe a few people that would understand it, but it cuts deep. Stephen D. Lee also liked the shotgun offense. And then here is Sun Devil sign number 1. Who's your daddy? And then in parentheses, in-law. And a little bit of a background on this one. Jeff Lebby's father-in-law is Art Briles. Jeff Lebby was at Baylor for all of that nonsense that got Art Briles shunned from college football after revolutionizing offenses nationwide. And Jeff Lebby was named very specifically in one of the lawsuits as having done nothing to stop one of his running backs from being pretty deep into substance abuse and domestic violence. And then that running back went on to get arrested for domestic violence, like immediately after that. And so Jeff Lebby, it didn't cost him, his career. And obviously Arizona State, they hired Phil Bennett too. So, we've had part of that Baylor staff as well. But just a reminder to people, Jeff Lebby's father-in-law is Art Briles. So Sun Devil sign number 1, who's your daddy? In-law. Let's get into right before, just so I'm not coming off as a massive Mississippi State hater here. I do want to give a shout out to Mississippi State as Arizona State has been embroiled the last 5 years in controversy with the NCAA. A lot of people believe that the NCAA's last gasp of power was spent on delaying things for Arizona State as far as not getting a resolution for documents the NCAA received in summer 2021. Didn't get the notice of allegations, for like 3 years. I want to say this. Nobody ever has been screwed over more by the NCAA than Mississippi State. So I want to give a shout out to Mississippi State. We just had a small taste of what Mississippi State has been through. Jackie Sherrill got fired, I believe, by Mississippi State, spent 15 years fighting them in court. He's the former Mississippi State head football coach. Spent 15 years fighting them in court before he got his name cleared and a financial settlement. So shout out to Jackie Sherrill. Shout out to Mississippi State for fighting the good fight in that case. Also, if you're not aware, the biggest screw job in NCAA history was because Larry Gillard bought some clothing from a store in Starkville at a 20% discount. A discount that the store owner says was available to every student, not just football players. But because Larry Gillard got that 20% off, the NCAA negated an entire season of wins. An entire season of wins for Mississippi State. Well, Mississippi State, this is in the mid-70s. They go and they get an injunction, right? They get an injunction that allows Larry Gillard to play the next season. I think they go like 9-2 or something. And then the way the NCAA works is if they win, they can make you forfeit everything that you did while you had the injunction. The NCAA took 19 wins from Mississippi State in the mid-70s over a 20% clothing discount that was supposedly available to all students. And guess who they did not let testify in any hearings? The store owner. So shout out to Mississippi State. Having gone through it with the NCAA the last few years, you had it the worst. You had it the absolute worst. I want to apologize on the NCAA's behalf. Nobody has had it worse than Mississippi State when it comes to dealing with the National Collegiate Athletic Association. So just a little bit of respect there from me after I, pissed off the 5 or 6 listeners from Mississippi State who are curious about this podcast. So apologies, and I understand that you've certainly had it worse than us. We're brothers now when it comes to hating the NCAA. So finally, let's get into my prediction for this game. I think it's going to be low scoring. I honestly think it's going to be easier for Arizona State to adjust to exploit some of Mississippi State's supposed defensive weaknesses. A lot of this is going to fall on Sam Leavitt. Can he be accurate down the field? But can we run off tackle? Can when the linebackers crash down, can Arizona State's running backs, whether it be DeCarlos Brooks, who's kind of better between guard and tackle, better one cut runner, but can Cam Scatterbu or Kyson Brown, can they get away from first contact and make sure that we don't end up in second and third and long? I got a lot more faith in Arizona State's ability to do that than I do Mississippi State's ability to play smart with the talent that was left over from the previous season where they averaged less than 10 points a game against SEC competition. So I like Arizona State in this one. I don't know if I like them by much, but I do think this student section is going to factor in. So let's call it right before we end our second episode of the Forecast on the 1012 Podcast Network. Arizona State 27, Mississippi State 17.